Hello, everyone. Welcome to another forecast. I'm Dr. Claire Moon, and today we're going to be talking about the astrology of 2025. So I've got probably about a dozen points today. I'm not going to be doing rising sign horoscopes, unfortunately. So apologies if that's what you were looking for. But if you hang around, I am going to be giving some general practical kind of notes to consider for the year ahead, especially March of 2025. My eyes are kind of on that. And I mean, if anything, just skip ahead and look at March. That's probably the most important, actionable set of infos that's going to be coming. But other than that, if you do find this info helpful today, hit the like button, hit subscribe if you want to keep up with things. I usually do just general month ahead forecast, which I am going to be doing mine for January coming up pretty soon. And then I'm usually doing about one rising sign horoscope per month as well. I have recently just released one for the Capricorn new moon that's going to be happening at the end of December. So check that out. That is for rising signs, so you can look at that. Otherwise, yeah, hit like, hit subscribe. I've got links below to my website. One of the best ways to support me is to book a session. I would love to read with you. If you like how I'm describing things today and talking about things, book a reading. Or if you feel so inclined, you can donate. There's also a link to that below as well. You can sign up for my newsletter if you want to keep up with my discount codes, which I usually send out one a month. Sometimes I do writing. It's a once a month newsletter, and it's usually just a one-stop shop for all my links, all my events, discount codes, etc., etc. Right now, my discount code is SeaGoat for 10% off of any of my things. So check out my website, www.aligninglightastrology.com. All right, let's get into my first point, which is going to be about Mars in Cancer. So Mars was already in Cancer once this year in 2024. They entered into there on September 4th. They spent about 2 months in Cancer. They're currently in Leo, spending about 2 months in Leo. And then they're going to be moving back into Cancer on January 6th. They'll be retrograding back into Cancer, and they'll be there really spending a significant amount of time until April 17th of 2025. Now, the big thing to consider with a planet in a place is the planet that's ruling over them. And in the case of Cancer, Mars is going to be ruled by the moon. So the moon changes sign in transit every 2.5 days. The ruler of this Mars is going to be in a new place every 2.5 days. And that downstream is going to affect Mars and their experience in the moon's place. So it's good to consider, with certain Mars words, energy, with motivation, that might be more on more of a cyclic clock in the first 2 quarters of 2025. Our energy might be dictated by the placement of the moon much more than we're used to. And so the good news and the bad news here is that there is a lot of rapid change, maybe, or cyclic change in our energy, our motivation in the next few months, the first 4.5 months of 2025. The good news is that, like, let's say you're not feeling motivation, you're not feeling energy, and you would like to wait a couple days, wait 2 or 3 days, and maybe you'll be feeling a little different, a little bit more ready to do what you need to do. So keep watching the moon, everyone. That is my practical advice for Mars's time in Cancer, is to watch the moon, especially when it comes to your energy, your motivation. Now, some other Mars words that we can play with here would be your assertion and self-advocacy. Mars is part of our expressive apparatus insofar as it gives us the sense of self-appreciation to advocate for ourselves, to stand up for ourselves, to fight against a thing if we need to. So when it comes to those types of things or conflict, that might also be on more of this cyclic, every 2.5 days, there's a change in the vibe type of energy. So if you're feeling like it's really hard to stand up for yourself, wait till the moon is in Aries. Wait till the moon is in Leo or some fire sign. That might help you have that little boost of something that you need to stand up for yourself. If you're feeling, on the other hand, too spicy, and you see where the moon is, maybe the moon is in a place where it's feeling very outspoken or spicy or whatever, wait 2.5 days. Or if the moon is at the end of that sign, you might only have to wait a few hours, and you might start to find yourself in a different mind state, a different place, pretty shortly. Again, with things like anger, assertion, self-advocacy, conflict. And that is totally dependent on, not saying what to do, that's going to be dependent on the context. So that's my first big point about Mars, is that we do have to consider what the moon is up to. Now, they're going to be stationing, Mars is going to be stationing direct on February 23rd of 2025. So between now, again, I record this mid-December, Mars is currently retrograde. Between now and February 23rd, it'll be probably in our better interest to leave Mars ruled things open-ended, let ourselves be experimental with Mars ruled things. And when I say Mars ruled things, I mean house topics that are ruled over by Mars. So the Scorpio house and the Aries house. So for this theoretical Taurus rising, this would be their 12th house and their 7th house. Not only is Mars going to be retrograding and redoing things or putting action or effort or focus in a different place, maybe across this Taurus rising's 4th and 3rd house. We have to consider home, family, parents for this person, or 3rd house people. But, and I know this is a lot, but this is how we do it. Mars might also be reconsidering how it's placing its effort and its energy, also relating to partners or mental spiritual health practices. So we're going to want to let all of these Mars touched, Mars ruled areas breathe, let it be open, let it be open-ended until February 23rd of 2025. Then Mars is going to station direct, and they are going to be very slow though for a moment. So, I mean, they're going to be at 17 degrees for a while. It takes them, I mean, the whole first week after stationing, they continue to be at 17 degrees. And so Mars ruled things are still likewise going to be moving slowly. And Mars really isn't picking up much speed until April, Then they're moving much more fast in April into May. So I expect, again, especially for Mars touched or Mars ruled places in the chart, I expect them to be reorganized, refined, polished, and moving forward or progressively much more in Q2, Q3 of 2025. So find out what house life topics that's going to apply to for you, and that'll point you to where you might need some extra patience the first half of the year of 2025. We could also use the keyword of focus for Mars. I've been noticing Mars coming up with a lot of like movement exercise type things. So those are also topics where we can apply all of the same treatments that I just applied, thinking about how those areas, say your exercise routine or wherever your focus is, how that might be done differently. Assertion done differently, conflict done differently, energy, motivation, doing it differently. So if your focus is dictated by the moon and changing here and there and getting a bit scattered between December, January till March, or sorry, till February 23rd of 2025, that would be a Mars retrograde experience. And then also just letting some of these Mars keywords, some of these martial things, letting ourselves do them differently in these 3 months, December, January, February, whether it's conflict, exercise, focus, motivation, self-assertion, advocacy for self or others, any of those Mars things during the retrograde, doing it differently, trying different things. And that I think is part of the experimentation, part of the leaving things open-ended and not being so tied to outcomes if we can do that. Because retrograde times are a time of doing things in a different way than we normally do. Whatever your usual way of doing things is with Mars topics, letting us have some change there for a few months. So if your focus is going to a different place, if your energy is going to a different place, if it's returning to some things that you thought you were done with, maybe you were working on things in your Cancer place over September, October of 2023, and now in 2025 you're having to return back to those things. That is also very possible. So there's a very different note and flavor for the first half of 2025 versus the second half of 2025, simply just based on Mars and the fact that they are going to be going through their post-retrograde phase, still moving pretty slow even after they station direct on the 23rd of February. Especially during the stations with Mars, and maybe this is my last Marshall point. When Mars or any planet is stationing, they can have a potential of being much louder than they normally are. And so, especially around beginning first week of March, last week of February. Oh, heck, let me just extend that. Let's say the second half of February into the first week of March. Mars is going to be stationing and basically not moving. So, if our energy or our actions are ramping up, if we're just really busy, because wherever Mars goes, it's kind of like we're just busy with that stuff in life, whatever those house topics are, especially during the station, extra busy. If there is frustration, extra frustration. If there is conflict or a kind of aversive quality in the air where people are just not getting along or there's discord, that stuff gets louder sometimes. So, physiologically speaking, adrenaline is a very martial thing. And adrenaline, once it's pumping, I mean, you need to get yourself into a calm environment or away from whatever is activating, and then be in that like calmer, not activating environment for a good 15 minutes, if not more, for that adrenaline to start to, for its effects to start to wane and go away. And so we can come back to Earth a bit. Um, Mars energy can feel really powerful and it can be just straight up power. So using that power wisely, using that energy really wisely at the end of February into March of 2025. Wherever Mars is, whatever they're doing in Cancer, that will lead me to my next point. Actually, no, I wanted to talk about Jupiter. I am going to say one thing about Jupiter, but that's not my next point. But it's relevant here that whatever Mars is up to in Cancer, and I mean, eventually Leo, but whatever Mars is up to in Cancer, if worst case, there has been some martial difficulties with discord, conflict, separations, anything like that, inflammations, injuries, all of that is Mars. June of 2025, we get Jupiter moving into here, into Cancer, and they're going to be helping to remedy, resolve, to really just help to kind of clean up, for lack of better words, whatever is going on in Cancer in 2020, early 2025. So, not to just say we can be complacent and just be a keyboard warrior and get in all kinds of battles that we don't need to get into. I think we still need to have like discernment. That's like very key. But if even with our best efforts, we end up with some mess in Cancer, just know that Jupiter will come by, Zaddy's coming home for the second half, quarter three and quarter four of 2025. I'm going to come back to Jupiter in there, but I figure it's worth mentioning being we're talking about Cancer and Mars. Now, if you're a night baby. One nuance to note is that if your birth chart has the sun below the horizon, if your birth chart has the sun below the ascendant descendant axes, that means you're a night baby if your sun is down here. And if you're a night baby, that means that Mars is much more of a friend, much more of an ally. And this can be a actually pretty fruitful time of tying, well, it can be a fruitful time for all of us in tying up loose ends with our Mars ruled places or Mars touch places, like putting in actions that we should have been doing earlier or whatever, or weren't able to do earlier. But another thing to consider is that if you are a night person, we're going to see less of these inflammations, conflicts, more of the unfavorable stuff. That we're not going to see as much for a night baby. If you are a day baby, I am one of those. My sun is above the horizon. We need to be a little bit more extra on guard, I think, about some of the more unfavorable Mars qualities like inflammations, separations, conflict, bumps, bruises, dings. And a good antidote for everyone, no matter what sect of birth chart you have, is to, if you are noticing these things, like if they're not happening, don't look for them. If you're not getting sick, great, that's fine. If Cancer is not your sixth house, I'm not worried about you. But one antidote is to move slower, do one thing at a time, focus. And that usually takes care of most of those preventable little bumps or dings that can happen when we're having extra strong Mars or retrograde Mars. And then last piece of nuance, if you have Mars retrograde in your birth chart, and Austin Coppock and Chris Brennan covered this really well. I can't remember if it was the November forecast on the Astrology podcast, maybe it was the October one. They were talking about Mars in Cancer, and they mentioned this about how with Mars retrograde people, natally speaking, those can be really fruitful times as well. So Mars retrograde in transit, mimicking what is also a Mars retrograde in a birth chart, that kind of alignment in phase can be just a really, can be a state that is really productive or really helpful, or just feeling like, yes, my motivations are where I want them to be. My energy is how I want it in a way that is helpful. That can be a really great time if you have Mars retrograde in your birth chart. So it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. Okay, my next point is about the nodes. They're changing signs, and this happens in on the 17th of January. So the lunar nodes, they have been in Aries and Libra all of 2024 and the second half of 2023. So the nodes spend about a year and a half in each sign. And they also move retrograde, so they're going to be moving backward compared to the other planets. And they're moving into Pisces and Virgo. And that's going to again be happening on January 17th. So all of 2025, first half of 2026. And it's going to be drawing a lot of focus to the Pisces and Virgo parts of your chart. So especially if you've got your angles, the ascendant, descendant, or the midheaven, subterranean point, the MCIC. These points, these are our angles. If any of those angles for you in your birth chart are in Pisces, Virgo, then this nodal shift is going to be most important for you. And that is because these angles represent the biggest things in our life. They represent who we are, where we came from, our home, who we're here doing things with, what we're doing in this life with the midheaven. So it's all these biggest things. And whenever the nodal axis shifts onto one of these axes, it's like the changes that the nodal shifts bring, those changes are affecting really important key core areas of life, for better or for worse. So it's worth noting, again, if you are a mutable sign person, basically. Especially if you're Pisces rising, Virgo rising, MCIC, and Pisces or Virgo. The North Node is a point of increase, and the South Node is usually a point of decrease according to the Hellenistic tradition. And so we expect to see more of a focus and amplification of house topics related with Pisces. And we expect to see potentially letting go, diminishing, lessening, even temporarily in the Virgo house topics of life. So for this theoretical Taurus rising, I would expect an expansion, an amplification, also big change with their 11th house groups, friends, hopes, dreams, aspirations. More of that, more friends, more groups, more hopes, more dreams. Or they're all just louder, you know? So that could be a thing. And then letting go of things for this theoretical Taurus rising, letting go of things in the fifth house of creativity, pleasure, rest, fun, children, self expression, romance, dating. Less of those things, or they're not as prominent. They're not as like main character front headline energy. That's less. That's the lessening. And I think people worry about loss here. Sometimes it's more of a temporary thing. Like, say your kid goes off to college for the first time and you don't hear from them as much. That could be a very south node in the fifth kind of example that I see. Um, so, again, a year and a half when the eclipses happen. So, we're going to have some in March and then again in September. Those are when those big changes usually are occurring or more apparent, more evident. And again, if you know your rising sign, you can hone in on which areas of life that nodal axes will be tilling up. I usually use this metaphor for the eclipses and the nodal shifts happening through signs as times of like tilling up the soil in a garden. It's not a stable time. It's very energetic, but it can really loosen up things that need loosening up. It can make space for things that need to come in, like nutrients into soil. And then it really prepares those life areas for planting new seeds. Now, last point with this, and now I've moved the nodes into here so we can see what it looks like. But we're also going to have the North Node amplifying a few planets as they move through Pisces. I'm not going to talk about their amplification of Venus. I'll cover that in my monthly forecasts. But I do want to mention here that North Node with Neptune is going to increase Neptune, and that's around January, February of 2025. After that, the North Node is going to be amplifying Saturn, which is going to be the strongest more in March and April of 2025. So January, February, when Neptune is being amplified, that means illusion, confusion, uncertainty, spirituality, synchronicities might be off the hook. Our sense of oneness, it's in Pisces too. So it's just very, very unclear boundaries. So be aware of difficulties with boundaries around this time and any kind of issues with substances, anything that could cause medications, anything that could cause confusion. Not that I'm giving medical advice, but especially around January, February of 2025, we need to exercise a little bit more caution, I think, around those topics. Usually I talk about Neptune in terms of spirituality, art, but also uncertainty and confusion. The North Node, I usually talk about in terms of confusion. So when you put them together, you get double. So what's interesting though is not too long after that, so a couple months later, we're getting an amplification of Saturn, which is really completely different energy. It's certainty, it's facts, what's real. It is boundaries. So then an amplification of those. So what I don't want to see here is some story of a lack of boundaries or confusion, maybe even despite our best efforts, because sometimes people are just straight up deceptive and there's shenanigans. But what I hope this isn't is then something happens that's unfortunate and then there's an increase in boundaries afterwards as like a response. So if we can come into 2025 with our boundaries firm, over communicating, taking as much accountability as possible for things, that's really going to help us get through any kind of soupiness here. So just so you know, those are other things that the nodal axis is going to be touching on as the nodes enter into Pisces and Virgo. And I suppose it is worth noting that for those who have had a year and a half in 2023 and 2024 of the nodes in Aries and Libra. So if you're a cardinal baby, if you have your angles, your AC, your ascendant, descendant, midheaven, subterranean point, if you have those in cardinal signs, congratulations, you're done in January. Hopefully, there's more peace in the lands. Hopefully, you've come to a point where you have tilled up your soil. It's very full of nutrients and ready to just grow and do its thing. So, congratulations, Aries Libra. You got done with that. Now, when the nodes are with Saturn, so when the North Node is with Saturn, I also wonder if it's going to be increasing not only Saturn archetypes, so boundaries, responsibility, um, maybe an increased desire for discipline. There can also be an increase maybe in Saturn ruled house topics. So, for this theoretical Leo rising, this would be their seventh house of partners and their sixth house of pets, labor, health. So some increasing focus, increasing activity with partners for a Leo rising in more like March, April, May of 2025. Also, maybe more labor, pets, duties, obligations. So, really, a practical piece of advice for everyone in the first 2 quarters of 2025 is, be careful about what responsibilities you take on. Be careful about what you say yes to, because when Saturn gets activated later, it's going to be like potentially a lot of responsibility or a lot of duty or burden, especially with Saturn ruled house topics or in Pisces and the house topics associated with Pisces where Saturn is. I think that is that my last point? I think that's my last point with the nodes. So let's see. Again, all told, January 17th, 2025 to July 26th of 2026 is the whole bookends for the nodal axes being in Pisces and Virgo. Let's talk about the void of course moons in March of 2025. So I have been sending this out to my clients anytime people get a forecasting session with me, not to like advertise, but I guess I totally am. I usually send people a transit report for like the next 6 months ahead, and it breaks it down based on your rising sign. And so for a lot of folks who have had readings with me, they've got this written down, but I'm gonna give these dates to everyone now. And I don't have the exact times here, so I have a link below to the Void of Course Moon calculator on astro-seek.com. Thank you, Mr. Peter. They are the person who makes this beautiful website. Check it out. There's a lot of different definitions for void of course moons. There's a Renaissance definition that happens a lot. There's a Hellenistic definition of void of course moon that doesn't happen a lot. They're also longer. I call it the industrial strength grade void of course moons. And historically, what these are periods of time where the moon is not interacting with any other planets in the sky. And the moon is our main transmitter of and connector between us and the planets and each other. And so when the moon isn't making any of those connections, it's really hard for stuff to be happening down here in a material, moon, lunar, earthly material sense, like the moon kind of is symbolizing. So these dates, March 2025, don't start stuff. The 10th through the 13th, the 16th through the 18th, the 25th through the 27th, and the 30th of March to the 1st of April. In the old farmer almanacs, you'll see that it'll say, don't plant, hunt, or fish when the moon is void of course. The cake is not going to turn out like the picture. It's like whatever we begin, whatever we try to start during this time, it's not going to turn out the way that we thought it would or at all, or it'll stall until the moon actually gets out of the void and ends up interacting with other planets again. So, what I do like to use these periods of time for, these void of course moons, is it's more of a time of resting, of coming into more meditative states, of doing things that are really familiar, easy, achievable, things that aren't going to be rooted into this moment for a long time that we need to turn out. So low impact activities during void of course moon. Don't ask someone on a date during a void of course moon. Stuff like that. It strategically, if you have stuff that you don't want to go anywhere, like let's say your boss gives you a really silly project that you're like, this is a silly project. We shouldn't be doing it. Why are we even doing this? It shouldn't be going anywhere. Maybe purposely start it on a void of course moon. It'll go nowhere. Maybe it'll stop. So March, that's one big thing about it is that we have these four void of course moons. Um, the other thing about March are the eclipses. Now, this is we're having some overlap. We're still going to be having some Aries eclipse stuff, but it's our last one in Aries, and that's going to be on March 29th. But before that, there's a lunar eclipse in Virgo on March 14th. So, culminations, great peakings, fruitings of something that maybe began 6 months ago. So think back to September 17th, October 2nd of 2023. What was going on, especially maybe with your, uh, could be more Libra, Aries, Pisces, Virgo parts of your chart, maybe especially Virgo. And see what's fruiting there, what's peaking there in March, or what things are being understood, what things are having light shown on them in a way that helps us to understand them better in March. And then we're going to have our last eclipse, a solar eclipse in Aries, which are usually great beginnings and endings. Any new moon is a beginning and an ending. When it's an eclipse, it's a louder beginning and an ending. Full moons are usually fruitings and culminations and like, oh, here's this thing. Or here's this realization, or here's this peak of activity. And an eclipse version of that is just louder and more. So, what beginnings and endings in Aries and the house topics that Aries is associated with in the chart? We can look at that for end of March. Um, there are a couple retrogrades in March. So this is where it's really important to know if you go back to the beginning of the video and I'm talking about how ways to use this information, one of those considerations of who are your time lords for the year? Which planets in these other timing techniques are more activated? Is Aries an activated place in your chart this year? If the answer is yes to any of those, or Mercury or Venus to any of those, then March will be more of an important month for you. If you are in a year where Leo, Sun, Cancer, Moon are time lords, activated places, the eclipses might be more important for you. March might be more important for you. If none of that is true for you, this March weather that a lot of us are going to be talking about, it might not impact you quite as loudly. So just keep that in mind, those other layers of timing. But I like to think about retrograde times as times to do things differently. Go back to things from the past, shore them up, tie up loose ends, fix, polish, refine. It can be a really productive time, but usually it can get a little scattered. There can be balls dropped, errors, things missed. That all is very real. We just got done with a retrograde right now, like it ended a few days ago, and I turned in an application during the pre-retrograde phase and it got lost on someone's desk for the entire 3 weeks. So it's like, yeah, those classic things do happen. So know that March is going to be a very interesting month. There's going to be a lot of change, I think, a lot of realizations or doing things differently that could result in a lot of success or moving in better directions. So it doesn't have to be anything to be concerned about. But, looking at March, like if you're planning a trip or a big project or anything that you like want to go well, be wary of March. And sometimes these things are out of our control. Sometimes that's when the children have vacation. That's when, my boss says I have to do this thing. So then give yourself and others extra slack, be extra kind, take extra care of yourself, pack extra snacks for March. Last thing, I guess, look to, as I've said before, the house topics of Aries, because that is going to be the brunt of the focus of March is Aries and its associated houses. If you are more advanced and you want to add in more, what life topics might be changing or pivoting or going in a different direction or potentially scattered, then you can look at all of the Venus and Mercury ruled areas because those are the planets that are going to be retrograde. Usually their retrograde affects the places that they're in charge of. So you can add that in too. That's a lot of fodder, but it's still less than all of the houses. So for what it's worth. All right, let's talk about Saturn and Neptune in Aries. So uh, Neptune. So just to be chronological here, Neptune is entering into Aries on March 30th, and they'll be in there until October 22nd of 2025. So right after we get done with that last eclipse, we'll be in the middle of those retrogrades, and then Neptune is going to enter into Aries, and they'll be in here until October 22nd. So nested within that, we'll have Saturn entering into Aries on May 24th of 2025 until September 1st of 2025. So essentially, very last week of May, June, July, August. So 3 months we'll have both Saturn and Neptune in Aries. It's interesting because it's not a new configuration. Saturn and Neptune have been together for a while. They've been together at least by sign and co-present since March of 2023 when Saturn got into Pisces. So they've been in the same room here now for 2 years. And if we start to go by an orb of 10 degrees, at this point, we're getting there. Yeah, once we get to January of 2025, we're going to have Saturn within that 10-degree orb of Neptune, and we're just going to increasingly have them intensifying their connection over 2025. And they'll be extremely close when they're in Aries. And then again, September 1st, Saturn goes back into Pisces to finish out their time there. That will end in February of 2026. So we still have another good year of dealing with Saturn and Pisces as well. And then October 22nd, Neptune gets out of there, but they'll continue to be very close. So we're not going to get much separation from them until 2026. We'll start to get Saturn making some space. So again, not a new configuration, but their presentation is going to change once they go into Aries. So these themes of what is real and what is not real. It's like that AI thing where we have to like try to see what's AI generated and like looking at people's hands and stuff and trying to look at like the detailed parts of things. That has entirely been this Saturn Neptune thing, that trying to figure out what's real or not. In Pisces, this is a place of creativity, art, spirituality, illusion, deception. Aries is a different story. Aries is about self-expression, individuation. Saturn has to move way faster than they would like to when they're in here. And I think, I mean, if I could say Neptune too, I bet Neptune's not fast. They don't seem like a fast anything. Um, so it's like the speed and the pacing of this challenge is just going to go up in June, July, August. I don't know exactly how that's going to manifest. I'm not that creative right now in my brain to try to think of the ways in which, like, just more acceleration of these changes or, what is going to be the outcome of that. And it might even be harder for Saturn to differentiate what is real, just because the pace is so quick. So we really, all of 2025 are going to have our heads on a swivel in terms of fact checking ourselves, fact checking each other, and just hopefully doing that before we say things, before we express, before we react, before we act. In Pisces, at least there's a slowdown here and they're more responsive. In Aries, we get more of that initiative and more of that energy to do, but we also can get some reactivity or going too fast or doing too much too quickly. And I think that is going to be one of the challenges for both Saturn and Neptune in Aries. So, at the same time, I think it could be really fruitful in terms of, having visions, having ideas about what could be, making it real. Saturn, putting the boundaries, the edges, the borders on it. What time, money, people do we need? And then in Aries, it's actually taking actions. It's doing the things to make it. And in Pisces, we don't have as much of that action element. It's still more in the dream space. It's more in like I'm going to just imagine it for a minute, which is fine. And that's part of the process. But then that process flips much more into action. So then if you are Saturn, I wanted to make a point with this particular discussion with Saturn and Neptune and changing signs that if you are a Capricorn or an Aquarius rising, this is more important for you because you are literally Saturn and you are personally having a front row seat and having to deal with this Neptune business, having to deal with confusion, lack of certainty, uncertainty, and the unworldly, unpleasant sensations and feelings that can arise from that. So, if you again are Capricorn or Aquarius rising, hang in there for the next year, maintain your boundaries. It can also be it can also be a really fruitful time of dissolving what is personally or resourcely not helping you, dissolving what is outdated or, any parts of self that could use dissolving. Really depends on the context, which way you want to go with that. There are some opportunities in here, not just, keeping water out of the ship with the bucket. Now, some action items, action words. When we have Neptune involved, we can have inspired action, spiritual action, actions of acceptance, intention, fueling our spiritual life. If we look at more unskillful examples of Neptune in Aries, I mean, with confusion, with uncertainty, and not slowing down, continuing to go fast, that would not be the move all the time. With spiritual inspiration, with feeling so like spiritually motivated, sometimes the real world details are not of concern, but with Saturn there, they really need to be. If there's confusion, slow down. If we're worried about Mars stuff going too fast, then do the Saturn thing of slow down. Or if we're worried about separation or conflict, we can do the Venus thing and have compassion and curiosity. With Neptune, that's the curiosity thing, more Mercury being an antidote to Neptune's confusion or Neptune's lack of facts, lack of understanding, lack of clarity. Do the Mercury thing, ask questions, have curiosity. So there are very real antidotes to many of the problems I think we might be having with Neptune, Saturn in a fire sign in Aries. We can always choose to kind of almost in a remediatory way, balance it out with some complementary things. Now, Saturn is realistic, they're disciplined, they're restrained. With Neptune there, some of that restraint gets dissolved. Some of that slowness of Saturn, that discipline of Saturn gets dissolved. And then we put that in Aries and it's just extra. Then we've got even more of a problem because there's nothing holding back impulsivity. There's less holding back impulsivity, less holding back potential impetuousness. Um, so if people are being, in 2025, if people are being really reactive and really punitive, like very quick to punish, quick to judge, quick to Saturn, quick to be rigid, we know to just chill on that. If other people are doing that, we can put some distance and love them from over here, and they can be over there. But that is probably my personal biggest concern with Saturn and Aries in general is and not coming it can come from us, but it can also come from external others or societies or governments, but increased speed in judgment, increased speed in rejection. So quick to reject, quick to judge, quick to do all of these Saturn things that could be pretty antisocial. So then again, doing the Venus thing in response, connection, giving people the benefit of the doubt, stuff like that. I think that brings me to Jupiter. Now, Saturn has been doing this overcoming square with Jupiter second half of 2024. So we noticed this the most in August of 2024, this crunchiness in the growth cycle. It is themes of contraction and expansion, delay and progress, no versus yes. And it's this very kind of it's the growing pains of the growth cycle. And this is one of the things that I'm really excited about for 2025 is that we're eventually going to get Jupiter and Saturn coming into a trine configuration, which is much less of like that awkward, crunchy growth part and much more of like the easeful growth, less growing pains, more progress. And that's going to be, more the second half. We're actually going to get that trine across the water signs, Cancer and Pisces. So that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to in 2025 is just this square of Jupiter and Saturn turning into a trine, which is very nice. We're going to have Jupiter entering Cancer on June 9th of 2025 and leaving there on June 30th of 2026. So we get a whole year of Jupiter bringing their qualities into the Cancer area of our life. And that's going to include Jupiterian growth, abundance at best. At least Jupiter comes in and stabilizes things. Jupiter will come in, and if things have been rough, they'll at least give us some stability so we can stand up again. They can liberate us from difficulties, which sometimes being liberated is a very difficult journey through a lot of dangers. So it's not like a easeful process all the time, but liberation from difficulties, Jupiter. Again, at best, opportunities, growth, expansion. If things are already okay and stable, then Jupiter can come in there and do even more of that. So, all to say, hang in there till June if you need to with Cancer ruled areas of your life, moon ruled areas of your life, the house topics associated with Cancer. Let's see if there's other things. So, for folks who have cardinal angles, so your ascendant, descendant, midheaven, subterranean point in the cardinal signs, Aries, Libra, Cancer, Capricorn, Jupiter coming into Cancer actually helps out pretty much this whole modality here. So if you are a Libra, Capricorn, Aries person, if you have your angles there, Jupiter moving into Cancer will be helpful for that. It'll also be helpful when Jupiter moves into Cancer, they'll get contact again with the Taurus ruled areas or the Taurus parts of our chart. So take a look at what areas of your chart are going to be seen by Jupiter once they change sign, and that can show us to other areas of life where that change of Jupiter is going to help us out a bit, send some stabilizing rays to certain areas. So the last thing I want to discuss today is Uranus moving into Gemini. Now, this is going to happen on July 7th. So July 7th, Uranus is going to be moving into Gemini, and they're going to be in there until November 7th of 2025. So effectively July, August, September, October. So about 4 months that we're going to have Uranus dipping into Gemini, giving us a preview of what they'll be doing there in 2026 through 2032. So they'll be spending about 7 years in a place, and they are an agent of change. They're an agent of disruption. They are an agent of interruption. That is incredibly real. I notice I have my chart ruler conjunct Uranus, and I myself have been a disruption to many in many spaces, in many groups. Uh, and I'm just constantly surrounded by interruption. I'm constantly being interrupted. If it's not happening at my job, it's happening in my personal life. So it's just the nature of the beast. And so the wherever Uranus is, I mean, we have to be flexible, adaptable, ready for change. I am looking forward to this in some ways because where Uranus has been Taurus. And when Uranus is in Taurus, Taurus is not an inherently flexible place. It actually is, its gift is maintaining things. Its gift is being consistent and stable. And so the last 7 years since 2018, Uranus being in Taurus, that area of life being destabilized has been extra annoying, I think. It's just such an incongruence in quality versus Uranus in Gemini. Gemini is a very flexible and adaptable place. It's incredibly varied. It is very fast paced. It can turn on a dime. And that works, I think, in our favor. Now, in another sense, that congruence also means that I think Uranus is probably able to act here very well in terms of what Uranus does. They're going to be able to Uranus very well. So, I have kind of two minds about it. Is it that the changes themselves come about with even more propensity, with more volume? And or is it easier for us to go with the flow within those areas of life? So for this theoretical Gemini rising, maybe with their identity, they're already used to being really flexible. They're already used to change because this is an incredibly changeable place on its own in Gemini. So maybe when Uranus comes in here and is changing things and causing different trajectories, Uranus or Gemini is like, that's fine. So look at the different areas of life. For me, that's my fifth house. My IC is there. So my home, my family stuff, it's always been changeable. In the last 20 years, I have never spent, it's on average about 1 to 2 years in a space. And the only spaces I have had to live in for longer, it's when I'm like squatting at my partner's and I'm like a ghost in my own apartment and I've got like two different living spaces and it's all like confusing and jumbled. It's always something. So, I'm already pretty flexible in that area of life. If Uranus comes in there and changes a bunch of stuff, I don't know, do I care? It's kind of the course of action that it's always been. So hopefully you're understanding what I'm saying there in terms of congruence and how that is going to affect things versus Uranus being in Taurus, that they've been there since, the last 7 years, since 2018. So, um, last thoughts are just that, whatever Uranus comes in and changes, oftentimes it is relative to what was already there. And it can bring change, bring things coming about in a new way, having solutions that are disruptive. And if the context of your life has been one way, if a planet like Uranus or Pluto comes in there and is going to be an agent of change or transformation, sometimes that can be towards something, much more favorable, say if it's been unfavorable. Or, I'm kind of hoping a girl can dream, maybe my last like 20 years of home instability, maybe now I'll have some. And that'll be the big change for me. That'll be very different, incredibly different. I haven't had that since 2006. So it'll change whatever's around. So what else about, of course, again, it's similar to what I did in earlier treatments. If you're a mutable sign, so if you're Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, Uranus going into a mutable sign is going to affect you a bit more than the other signs. If you have big placements in Gemini, especially early Gemini, this Uranus transit, you're going to notice it probably. And even before then, so let's say you're an early Gemini rising, you're probably noticing Uranus even before they get into Gemini. You know, they might be 10 degrees away from your ascendant at this time. Because where are they right now? They're at 20 something. Yeah, they're at 23. So if you've got, you know, your ascendant in the first few degrees of Gemini, you're probably already feeling Uranus coming in stronger and stronger and stronger. Um, all to say it is slow transit. They act quickly though. Last thing I'll say about Uranus is that they are going to be in a really interesting configuration with the outer planets as they move into Gemini. We have this sextile, trine, sextile configuration between Pluto, Uranus, with Neptune sandwiched in the middle. And so, just in general, the next several years are going to be full of change and, you know, rapid progress usually happens. Anytime this configuration comes up historically, the history that goes along with these periods of time, it's rapid progress. It's like the printing press or, you know, like what we have now, AI. It's these huge leaps forward. And it can also happen in societal, political, spiritual contexts as well, with Neptune being involved, sociological change. Um, all to say 2025 is really this time of big signatures of change. So the last piece of information that I want to leave with you, and I had mentioned how much I am into like trines, especially the Saturn Jupiter trine coming about and growth cycles becoming more easeful, going into more of an easeful period, especially in August when we have Jupiter and Venus both in Cancer. I have my eyes on August as a really interesting month in terms of having some really fruitful, more favorable things in certain parts of the sky, and also just very energetic, pumped up things like this Uranus, Pluto, Mars, like grand trine that's happening across the air signs in August as well. So, very curious to see what that's going to be, what that's going to be about. And I just wanted to point people to August as a nice patch of weather, which I will discuss more when we get closer to that period of time. And the last thing, too, is just noting that Saturn and Mars are going to be in a trine for most of the first part of 2025. The whole time when we've got Mars in Cancer, January, February, March, April, we've got Saturn in a trine with Mars. And that usually is putting together our motivation and our discipline in a way that can just really have us experiencing more progress, which progress is not always good. Sometimes it's time to rest, especially in the winter in the Northern Hemisphere. It is time to rest. But life feels better when we are able to move forward on the things we care about. And it's easier to move forward on the things we care about when Saturn and Mars are in a trine. That's my opinion. That's what I see. But that was the thing about 2025. Even in those first 2 quarters of the year where it's like a little dicey and the March is weird and there's some things going on, but you know what? We got this Mars Saturn trine, so I'm feeling galvanized about it. That's what I have for you. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate any of your thoughts, comments below. Please let me know if you have any things happening in your life that end up being reflected by any of this. I'm always curious to see how these things manifest for people. And if you have any questions about anything that I've said today, you can also put it in the comments below. You can find me at my website, www.aligninglightastrology.com, or you can email me at aligninglighastro@gmail.com. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good 2025. and take care of yourself and take care of each other.